So we are continuing with 1914 Germany at war. Um, and well, by continuing, I mean finishing. The game is over. It was pretty much a decisive German victory. As you can see here, these are all the dead Entente. That's all the dead Germans. In fact, if you work it out right with the Germans, you might not hardly even take any step losses. The game seems very sort of favorable towards the Germans if they start collecting Valor points early in the game, which, as you can see here, I actually had, I think, 9 Valor points there. And a big part of that was because I managed to break into the French interior here. You can see sort of a line of conquests right to Paris, and then went on and took Rouen too to get to kill off the last few units I needed to achieve a victory. And part of it was bad play on my part with the French, where I made some very ill-advised attacks, where I thought, oh, I think I've got more points than the Germans here, without realizing, no, I in fact don't have more points, and I especially don't have more points when they had, I think at the time they had 4 Valor points. You know, they're adding that to every combat, which gives them sort of an entrenched advantage in addition to whatever terrain you're hitting them in. So, you know, I did get Marshal Foch into the game. He was in Saint-Quentin, but ultimately, when I needed to use his ability, I did not have the initiative disc with the Entente, so I couldn't use his, double their strength ability. And that's really what I should have done before I did this big attack up here into, I think that's Mons up there. Those guys, you know, I was thinking I would go in and knock down some of the Germans there. Barely scratched them and did a bunch of damage to myself. Left this space open to be taken by the guys that were up in Antwerp. There was once 4 blocks there. So the Germans swooped in, used the pioneer capability to reduce those garrisons, and then killed the 2 blocks that were defending that pretty easily. Now these guys are isolated, and the entire French front here just splits wide open. So then I just had 4 blocks stacked here that I managed to just race right down into Paris. Their leader, you can see I moved him down there on the 3rd turn, and he's not reduced yet because essentially the game ended when I took this space here and killed off these 4 reserve units for the French, and that was all she wrote. So as you can see, that's pretty lopsided, and I don't know of any way I could have really killed any German units with the French. Every attack that I attempted to do with the French was fairly disastrous, especially once the Germans had racked up some Valor points from those fortresses up there in Belgium. I attempted down here to do some attacks with the French that were all just terribly ill-conceived and ended up costing, whittling steps off of my French blocks, which allowed the Germans to then start knocking them down further, because once you're in an engaged space and you've lost a couple of strength points, your opponent now knows, oh, well, you're going to have exactly this on the next turn, and now I can just move in, and or maybe not even move in, just stay there with the guys I already have engaged with you, and kill off your blocks. It's sort of like a slippery slope. Once you lose any kind of numerical advantage, it's going to grow turn after turn after turn. As long as the enemy engages you, they'll just whittle you down, and there's nothing you can do to whittle the enemy down, because you'll at most be doing 1 or 2 points of damage, and those will usually be easily absorbed by the mainly white dotted German units that are attacking, because any block, just as an example here, any block that has white dots on it, those dots take 2 hits to reduce. So, if these guys are defending and you only do 1 hit to them, then this guy just absorbs that hit and nothing happens. So that's basically what happened with all the German units. They were all, white dots, and they could all absorb the 1 and 2 hits that the French were hitting them in return with, whereas they were doing 5 or 6 hits to the French on most of their attacks. And over time, that's a recipe for reduced French units, and there's really nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do about it is to rotate those reduced blocks out and bring fresh blocks in, or alternatively just move out of the space entirely so you're not actively engaged. That's what I did here at Saint Mihiel. I moved these guys back to Verdun. So it just felt very lopsided to me once the Germans kind of got grinding on. The struggle for the Germans is, getting your front coordinated according to the stacking limits and your leadership capabilities, and then and then having leadership capability. In order to keep this front moving up here, I had to, at the start of each turn, replenish the 3 main leaders up here, which were the blue, the dark blue, the yellow, and the green armies, German leaders. Down here, where I was trying to do some work, here's the pink leader, there was the brown leader, there's the red leader here somewhere. These guys were, I was having fewer points to replenish these guys with, and so in order to keep the front moving down here, you have to spend the points off of these guys, and that becomes much, much harder to do when you need to keep lots of points on your leaders up there. They're getting the replenishment each turn. These guys are getting maybe a point, if that. So it slows things down. So one thing you can't do as the Germans is actually advance every unit with every leader on your front, because you'll just run out of leadership points too quickly. Since these guys get reduced at the end of every activation. And if you spend that last point of theirs, the little heart icon on there, that kills them. And they go down here and count against you in your dead pool. So with the Germans, you do have that restriction. But as you can see, it didn't prove to be much of a restriction. They ended up romping pretty easily. Granted, I made some terrible decisions with the French. Frankly, as the French, I don't think you should attack at all. You should just try and defend wherever you can, try and hold the line for as long as you can, and keep your units from dying. With the Belgians, there's really not much you can do about that. But with the French, you can shuffle guys around and play kind of a shell game to try and keep guys alive as long as possible. There is an optional rule for the French, Plan 17. If they make a new engagement against an area in Germany, they gain 1 Valor point, which is a way to at least get the French an early Valor point. And now I think somebody on Board Game Geek had read the rule that, the way that Plan 17 was written, it was however many German areas they attack into, regardless of outcome, they'll get a Valor point for each one. But the designer, Emanuele, chimed in and said, well, it's intended to only provide 1 Valor point total, regardless of the number of areas you attack into. Given that Germany's going to get probably 3 Valor points, maybe 4, as many as 5 Valor points from Brussels, that's going to be a lopsided Valor point situation, and ultimately the French aren't going to be able to hold any kind of defensive line with a 5-point deficit. Now they can kind of make up for that with some terrain advantages where they exist, or with some garrison advantages where they exist. But the goal is to try and damage German units, and that's very hard to do when the margins of victory or perhaps defeat are really narrow. If it's a narrow margin of defeat, 2 hits against the Germans, against 4 German blocks, even 2 German blocks, is just going to be absorbed and shrugged off. So I'm not entirely sure what the French can do other than just delay. It's hard to see where in particular they would be effective in actually hurting German units. I tried it down here, and it was a dismal failure. And in fact, the Germans ended up attacking down here. You can see they actually got into the Vosges mountain range and up next to Epinal. despite the fact that they were supposed to be weaker down there. The only way they were actually weaker down there was that their leaders didn't have a lot of points. This, in fact, my central area here was basically contested the whole time because I just couldn't advance anywhere on that front. I didn't have any points to allocate to the red forces there. That red leader, he was down to used up all his points in the first turn, and I ended up not getting him any points back because of my focus on going through Belgium and hitting from the north here per the Schlieffen plan. But that ultimately ended up working, and they were able to run right through the French interior and into Paris. So I think part of it was, I left things open back here. I probably should have moved a lot of these French forces off of the line and made a line over here to protect Paris. Right here, I thought this Lille-Maubeuge line would be uncrackable until I made my mistake of advancing the French forces that were there into there. Had I just left them where they were, that indeed would have been unbreakable. You could stack 4 French blocks and up to 4 British blocks, plus a number of garrisons there, which would just be untakeable by any 4 German units, even with Valor points. Yet, you end up moving guys out of there, and you can lose it. But that is another thing. Like here, if the stacking limit is 2 blocks, you could have 2 defenders and a garrison there, and these are good British units that have, I think, 5 red dots per unit. So you're looking at a defense of what? That's +2 for the terrain each. So there's 14 for your 2 blocks, and 7 for the garrison, which defends at 5. Add 2 for the terrain, so 7. So you got 21 points defending there, and the Germans could bring at most 10 points plus another 4. That would be 14 if they have an adjacent leader at full strength. The rest of that you'd have to make up with Valor points. So otherwise it's just untakeable. I don't know how you would take it if it's fully defended. So I don't know. It seems like the game can create stalemates that way. But as you can see, it's not totally stalemated if you make stupid decisions. And I guess that's what you'll be counting on, is for your opponent somewhere, in this tile puzzle of a game, that somewhere he will have slotted out a unit that will leave an opening in terms of a point spread that you can wheel in there and exploit and pry open and widen and make some kind of offensive movement. So an interesting game. I'll definitely need to play around with it some more. My first impressions are pretty good. It's light but fairly deep, but maybe limited by its lightness in terms of what you can and can't realistically accomplish on the board. So anyway, more exploration to be done, but overall initial thoughts very positive.